Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. A Turn in the Road continued. John stayed at Beth's house for 3 more days before he decided to return to his job at the paper. As his strength slowly returned, he took increasingly longer walks each day with Beth. Still, he continued to suffer intense vertigo and frequent spells of double vision. On their walks, they talked about his vision of the dead woman's spirit that had risen from the street and disappeared into thin air. Their conversation turned to ghosts and life after death. Both of them wondered what the apparition meant. Beth listened patiently and was as troubled as John, if not for different reasons. Once, on one of their evening walks, John nodded at a man passing by and tipped his hat. Beth gaped and told John there was no one there. John turned and watched silently as the man walked down the path and disappeared around a turn. John shuddered and decided not to speak of his visions anymore. Neither did he tell her about the strange dreams, which disturbed his sleep. With exercise and Beth's care, John's limp became less pronounced and he hardly needed the cane anymore, though he continued to carry it as an affectation. He felt it made him look more dignified. Still, he was thin and weak. The dark circles under his eyes gave evidence to the fact that he hadn't been sleeping well. When John announced he was going to return to the newspaper, Beth nodded and told him his boss, Mr. Stelson, would likely be expecting him. John finished his breakfast and went up to his room, where he carefully removed the bandages on his head. Deep purple bruises were visible near his hairline and around the large bald spot where the doctor had shaved his head to sew stitches into his scalp. He carefully combed his hair to cover his wound and gently placed a bowler on his head. Then he took up his cane and walked briskly to the door. Kissing Beth goodbye, he confidently strode down the sidewalk. Despite his recent outings, John was exhausted by the time he arrived at the paper. While he tried to walk self-assuredly into the newsroom, he found the effort challenging. But he did not get very far before the office staff and his fellow reporters hurried over to greet him. Shaking their hands as they welcomed him back to work, he smiled cordially. But rumors of his condition must have preceded him, because everyone treated him with special deference and avoided the normal banter the younger reporters usually shared. At one point he had another bout of double vision as a copyboy raced toward him and split into 2 images that seemed to dash past him on both sides. John closed his eyes and struggled to suppress the accompanying wave of vertigo. Before even reaching his own desk, a senior reporter stopped him and directed him into Mr. Stelson's office. Upon his arrival, he took a seat across from his editor's desk, as his normally gruff employer subjected him to 15 minutes of uncharacteristic small talk before finally giving John an assignment. Rising carefully from his seat, John thanked Mr. Stelson and hobbled out of the newsroom. The assigned task was an annoyingly trivial one, ostensibly to cover the opening of the new bank a convenient short 2 blocks away. The sidewalks and streets were crowded with a festive holiday atmosphere. Today was Election Day, and the town's political elite were all out doing last-minute stumping. "It's good to be seen up and around again," he thought. "If I'd been gone much longer, everyone would think I'd died." As he walked, he slipped effortlessly back into his reporter's mindset and mentally tallied who would be attending the bank opening and whom he might interview. The importance of the new bank made it a political event, and he grinned to himself as he anticipated the opening ceremonies and the opportunity to be reporting again. Stopping at the intersection across from the bank, he waited for the traffic to clear. Next to him, a group of young boys, free today because the schools were closed, impatiently gathered beside him, searching for a break in the busy street. The clutter of carriages, wagons, and horses was unusually thick. Some of the boys darted through the congestion and made their way across the street unharmed. The smallest of their troop hesitated and found himself separated from his companions. Just then John's vision blurred. The crowd before him split and multiplied. It seemed there were far more people present than a moment before. Glancing down at the boy, John saw him dash into the traffic. Or at least, he thought he did. Actually, he saw several boys. One made it across the street, a second froze amidst the sudden rush of traffic and was trampled by a horse. A third image revealed the same youth still standing beside him, afraid to brave the crowd. John squeezed his eyes shut briefly and opened them again. The multiple images were gone, and he saw the small boy standing next to him. The child's companions on the other side of the road taunted him, noisily daring him to hurry across. As the boy started to bolt toward them, John grabbed his collar with his strong right hand. "Whoa there, boy," he said. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" The memory of the image of the youth being trampled under a carriage sent chills cascading down his body. Keeping a firm grip on the boy, John waved his cane to slow down an oncoming wagon and make a break in the traffic. As soon as the traffic halted, several pedestrians rushed across the gap. Hobbling across the thoroughfare with the youth in tow, John hurried to the other side of the street. Once safely on the other side, the horse and wagon traffic resumed its chaotic flow behind him. The boy wriggled free from his grip, muttering a disparaging epithet as he disappeared into the crowd with his companions. John swayed and grabbed a nearby lamppost as another wave of vertigo nearly overcame him. What just happened, he wondered. Did I really see a vision of that boy dying under a horse's hooves? Did I just save him, or am I hallucinating now, as well as seeing ghosts? With great effort, John continued his short journey to the bank. As he watched the opening ceremony, he pondered the incident but pushed it from his mind as he remembered his assigned task. At one point, he experienced double vision again and thought the mayor dropped the scissors he was using to cut the ribbon on the bank's new doors. However, as his vision cleared once more, John realized the mayor hadn't dropped the scissors after all. After the ceremony, John headed back to Beth's house without interviewing a single official or dignitary. When he got to his room, he collapsed on his bed, exhausted, and quickly fell asleep. John slept fitfully. Again, strange, vivid dreams disturbed his rest. Incompatible images of unknown yet oddly familiar places flashed through his mind. In his mind, he saw his hometown change into a large city and grow to an unimaginable size. As a detached observer, he watched tall glass and metal buildings rise up to tower over the surrounding countryside, which disappeared as more and more buildings were constructed. A moment later, he beheld a very different vision. In this new dream, the city was deserted and abandoned, without a single living soul within it. Only dust, death, and shadows remained. Somehow, all of these images were of Kansas City, yet somehow, none of them were. In one image, he witnessed the city destroyed in a firestorm that burned and blackened every building. In an instant later, he witnessed riots and war rage through the streets. In one scene, he saw crowds of friendly faces, and in the next, he beheld armies of hostile invaders in strange military uniforms march ruthlessly through the city, slaying everyone in sight. Waking in a sweat, he shook uncontrollably. Eventually, he calmed down enough to rise and limp over to the window. Then, leaning on the sill, he drew deep breaths of the cool night air to clear the frightful images from his mind. This calm, soothing air and the quiet of the evening seemed at such odds with his dark, foreboding dreams. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing outside was strange at all. The night breeze carried the sound of crickets across the serene, sleeping city. Shaking his head to clear the cobwebs from his mind, John soon returned to bed, but he took one of the sleeping draughts the doctor had prescribed for pain. Laying back down, John worried about his increasingly frequent hallucinations. "Am I going mad?" he thought. "Am I losing my mind?" Resting quietly while waiting for the doctor's tonic to take effect, he listened to the chirping of insects calling to one another in the still night. After what seemed a long time, the medicine finally dragged him down into a dreamless slumber. The next morning, John woke late, still dressed in the clothes he'd worn the day before. After washing and shaving hurriedly, he donned a fresh suit and headed downstairs to join Beth and her mother. Breakfast was over, but both of them were still sitting at the dining room table. They were talking in whispers and stopped abruptly when he entered the room. Beth smiled, but her mother wore a worried expression she couldn't conceal. After a somewhat strained casual conversation, Beth's mother rose and went into the kitchen to bring some food, leaving him and Beth alone. As they waited, he told Beth of the incident with a boy in the street the day before. "Oh dear," she said. "Perhaps we should go back to see Dr. Wilkes." Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons. If you loved what you heard, please like and subscribe to our audio anthology, and consider visiting our Patreon site at www.patreon.com/Melissa Del Toro voiceover, which you can find listed in the show notes for this episode.